Recently, Donald Trump held a rally. During the rally, he told everybody to go get the vaccine, and he was booed, which I'm sure he didn't expect. But he said, hey, look, that's your freedom. You make the choice that's right for you. There's a couple interesting things about this. One, I was told that Trump supporters were in a cult and just would do anything Trump said to do. Apparently, that's not true. And the other thing is, I don't think celebrities or high profile personalities should be telling people to get the vaccine. I believe they should be telling people to talk to your doctor. I did that for a few reasons. I don't want to be responsible for your medical decisions. I don't know your medical history. And some people have either risk factors or underlying conditions, meaning you should say this. Look, everybody, talk to a trusted doctor. I'm not saying go talk to someone you don't know or trust. I'm saying talk to someone you do trust and make the decision that's right for you. Trump said that's your freedom. Well, we've got big news. There's going to be a lot more mandates now because the FDA has formally approved the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination. It was previously under emergency use authorization. Now it's fully FDA approved. This means they can market the product, and you're likely going to see way more mandates. New York public schools have just issued a mandate. All staff must be vaccinated. We now have the military. Pentagon is saying COVID-19 vaccines will be mandatory. So expect to see a lot more. And as per the title of this video, a Democrat has introduced a bill mandating vaccination to travel to and from U.S. airports. Previously, we heard that the Biden administration was talking about requiring a vaccine for interstate travel. And many people, they were questioning what that meant. I mean, can I drive across the bridge to West Virginia? Does that mean I can't get on a train or a plane? Well, the administration said it may be too polarizing. And yeah, absolutely. Look, I think vaccines are great, but I think you're getting into really dangerous territory when you start creating second-class citizens. Well, now we have the bill. It doesn't mean it's going to pass, but certainly here we go. There's a lot of challenges with vaccine mandates. As I've mentioned many, many times, there are people who want to get it who just can't. So how about we have very, very strict and a serious approach to how we handle this? Instead, we're getting just straight up vaccine zealots. Get it or else. Okay, look, I think you go to your doctor. I'm not making that choice for you. But what about people with disabilities and ailments or risk factors? Based on New York City's mandate, with the teachers, how many teachers are about to get fired on September 13th? How many businesses are going to be forced to terminate employees? This is the problem with vaccine mandates. They are eliminating medical exemptions and they are eliminating negative test alternatives. Before they were saying, okay, you either have the vaccine or you get a negative test. They're getting rid of that now. Think of what's going to happen once they mandate the vaccine for domestic travel, for going to and from airports. How many people with issues like multiple sclerosis or epilepsy or a history of anaphylaxis or some other nerve disorder, Guillain-Barré syndrome, are going to be told straight up, you are no longer allowed to fly? We can't have that. It violates the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've got to have anti-discrimination and fairness. And that means these mandates will not work. Now, as for celebrities telling people to get vaccinated, I'm just sick of the double standard. Celebrities come out and they tell you do all these things, and I don't think they should be giving medical advice. But so long as they do, and so long as the media is towing this line and pushing this, you will see Democrats comfortable with discriminating against people with disabilities. That is a slippery slope. In Australia, we see how bad things are getting. New York City is crossing the line to an extreme degree, and it's spreading. Let's take a look at what's going on with these stories, because we have very interesting politics here. Notably in Florida, doctors walked out of the hospital in protest because they're treating unvaccinated COVID patients and they're sick of it. Meanwhile, other hospitals see doctors protesting because they don't want to get the vaccine. Look, I think we got FDA approval. A lot of hesitant people can rest easy on that. Look, you don't got to trust the government, but there's a certain level of trust. I don't think there's a grand conspiracy. I think it's safe and it's fine. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what I think, because I'm not going to tell you what to do. I think you go do what you want to do. But I'm just sick of the authoritarianism. That's it. I want people to have equal opportunity in this country. And it seems to be that the authoritarian left faction is just all about discrimination. Let's read the news, and we'll talk about what's going on with this HR 4980 about domestic travel. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member. And you will get an advertisement-free experience on all our news articles, as well as access to our members-only podcast segments. And we are now going to have behind-the-scenes segments from the Cast Castle vlog. We've got a great behind-the-scenes segment we'll put up shortly with Dave Smith, the comedian and libertarian, and it's just us hanging out. When people come and hang out, we're filming for the vlog. We get this not so family-friendly version of events, and we'll put that up for members only. So we got more and more content coming your way at timcast.com. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share it with your friends. Let's read the news from timcast.com. FDA approves Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination. They say 8 months ago, the same vaccination was first to be granted emergency approval in the U.S. In July, the federal government bought an additional 200 million doses of the company's COVID-19 vaccine. They should be delivered from October 2021 through April 2022. So far, the U.S. has exercised its option to buy 500 million of the 600 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine that were secured through an agreement announced last year by Trump. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla said in a statement at the time, vaccines have been and will remain critical to protecting lives against the devastating disease. These additional doses will help the U.S. government ensure broad vaccine access into the next year. The license application includes more than 340,000 pages of material. That's good. The earlier emergency use authorization submission was 110,000 pages. Hey, there's more developing. There's more information. That's good, right? The approval of Pfizer-BioNTech's vaccine was based on its clinical trial of 44,000 people, half of whom got the shots, the company said. The median 6-month follow-up period for safety and efficacy began after participants received their second dose, Pfizer said. The company plans to follow the enrollees for 24 months. To qualify for FDA emergency use authorization last December, the company followed trial participants for a median of 2 months after getting the second shot. Quote, the FDA decision also clears the way for companies to market their vaccine, which is not permitted without full licensure. And it may launch a race for booster shots, allowing doctors to prescribe extra Pfizer-BioNTech shots off-label to anyone they think should get one. That's particularly interesting. I certainly hope that your doctor is someone you trust, who is knowledgeable. And if you feel that your doctor doesn't know what's going on or what they're talking about, I just recommend you get a better doctor. I say this, look, it is your personal decision. We had Kurt Schlichter. He's been on the show a couple times. He's a rad dude. He's conservative. He writes a bunch of books, and he went to his doctor, and his doctor was knowledgeable on all of this stuff and says, Kurt, you should get it. And that's Kurt's choice. And there you go. I think it's up to you, and I think you have to find a good doctor. But let's talk about when things go overboard. From the New York Times, the Pentagon moves to make vaccination mandatory in line with the FDA's approval. With the FDA approval, more and more companies now are going to be issuing these mandates. And I am not a fan because not everybody is able to exist in this manner. And this is where it gets more worrying. From Must Read Alaska, I must admit, not a source I would ever typically use. I'm not familiar with it, but there's very few people covering this story. Congressman files bill to make vaccines mandatory for commercial flight. H.R. 4980, offered by Democrat Rep. Richie Torres of New York, directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to, quote, ensure that any individual traveling on a flight that departs from or arrives to an airport inside the U.S. or a territory of the U.S. is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The vaccine passport legislation conflicts with what airlines are telling customers, which is that there is no place safer to be than on an airplane when it comes to COVID-19. Quote, flying on an airplane is safer than grocery shopping or eating out, says experts, the Alaska Airlines blog has said for months. According to research, airplanes are the safest indoor environments globally, and flying remains relatively low risk. The CDC requires international travelers to show a negative COVID-19 test before boarding a flight to the U.S., but has no mandate for vaccinations. Well, here we go. From congress.gov, H.R. 4980 to direct the Secretary of Homeland Security to ensure that any individual traveling on a flight that departs from or arrives to an airport inside the U.S. or a territory of the U.S. is fully vaccinated against COVID-19. They say, Mr. Torres of New York introduced the following bill, which was referred to the Committee on Homeland Security. Section 1, Air Transportation Vaccination Requirement. A, in general, the Secretary of Homeland Security, acting through the Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration, shall take such actions as are necessary to ensure that any individual traveling on a flight that departs from, we get it, it's in the name. B, exception. Now, see, this is where there's interesting things. In carrying out subsection A, the Secretary shall ensure there is an exception to the requirement described in such subsection for an individual who is ineligible or medically unable to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. I love it. Not the mandates. I don't love that. But I appreciate they're at least putting in an exception. Now, I want to stress they say ineligible or medically unable to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. They say, in this act, the term fully vaccinated means receiving all recommended doses of a COVID-19 vaccine that is licensed under 351 of the Public Health Services Act. There's two big problems here out of the three paragraphs. First, I will state what is fine and good. The exception says ineligible. Now, ineligible, I believe, just means it's broad, I suppose. There has to be faith-based exemptions. There are certain religions that we cannot violate their right to practice, not tainting their blood. I know you might not agree with their religious views, but we've got to tread carefully. There are certain people who don't allow injections or transfusions, and yes, they lose their lives sometimes because of this. I would imagine that falls under ineligible, but we'll see. I'm not a fan of the legislation as a whole. Medically unable, that's the right thing to do. We cannot just force everybody because some people can't. Now, here's the issue. I don't think that we should have general mandates for this. There has to be some limit to personal responsibility. But more importantly, in the definitions, they say fully vaccinated. Well, as we know, they've now been recommending booster shots. 8 months after getting your second dose, they're saying get a booster shot. The problem I have here is if it's an ever-changing goal, we can't, it's a downward spiral. It's a downward spiral of continually expanding authoritarianism and more mandates. There are hard ethical questions here, I have to admit. We don't want novel viruses with long-term health effects to be persistent. And the challenge, I think, with COVID is that it's not airborne Ebola, but it's also much worse than the flu. People who get long COVID end up having long-term symptoms. And there's a few prominent individuals you may have seen who are not leftists who have talked about having long COVID symptoms that last for a really long time. I certainly think politics is mucking everything up. And that's why I am on the side of you making the choice that's right for you. Because I don't want some partisan zealot just to be like, we must or we mustn't simply because my tribe said so. It's insane. Okay, there's a lot of people who are like, everyone has to do it no matter what. And it's like, I'm going to go talk to my doctor. I'm going to figure out what makes sense for me. I'm going to look at the risk factors. I'm going to look at the demographics. I'm going to look at my personal health. And then I'm going to say, Doc, what do you think? And if there's a doctor I don't trust, I'm going to find a second opinion. That's normal. But when you get zealots and you get conspiracy theorists, you end up with the worst of everything. I don't like the mandates. I really, really don't. I think it's oppressive on the commons, and it's stripping away individuality, individualism, decentralization. It is centralizing power in a very, very bad way. What do we do about it? Honestly, I can't give you those answers. I don't know. I can just tell you that we have to make sure we do everything in our power to speak up and oppose measures like what they're doing in Australia, which are insane. But here we go. Mandate for those in the military. The New York Times says full federal approval for the Pfizer BioNTech COVID vaccine for those 16 and older is opening the way for institutions like the military, corporate employers, hospitals, and school districts to announce vaccine mandates for their employees. National medical groups hailed the step. A joint statement by the American Medical Association, American Hospital Association, and the American Nurses Association called it a major step forward in the worldwide effort to end this pandemic. Today's news marks a critical moment for the people who were concerned about getting vaccinated due to the vaccines being authorized for emergency use. With millions of data points on the vaccine safety and efficacy over nearly 9 months of vaccinations, every I is dotted, every T is crossed. The groups added, with the Delta variant surging, there has never been a better time to get vaccinated. One of the first and largest at the Pentagon, which announced on Monday that it was moving ahead with plans to require all active duty troops to be vaccinated. Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III will soon send specific vaccination guidelines to the country's 1.4 million active duty service members, the Pentagon said. Mr. Austin had already received authorization from President Biden to mandate vaccines for troops once the vaccine was fully approved, and he is moving swiftly to put the plans into action, said John F. Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman. I want to point something out for everybody that I find confusing. I'm not a big fan of tribalist general anti-vaxxer stuff. I think there's political questions that need to be asked, and I think we got to be wary of authoritarians for sure. But people who enlist or sign up for the military already get a bunch of vaccines. This is the weirdest thing to me, that a lot of people are saying, oh, they don't want to get it or they won't. And I'm like, here's what I genuinely don't understand. And you don't have to agree with me, but I know a bunch of people in the Army. They say they got in and they went to, when they were going through basic, they got a bunch of vaccines and shots. And they're like, what were they? I'm like, a bunch of shots. I went to a doctor once to get a bunch of vaccines and I got a bunch of vaccines. If this is FDA approved, I just don't understand what people think. No, I get it. Listen, when I got the what did I get? I got Hep A and yellow fever shots and a bunch of others. People are like, those have been around for decades, so we know long-term effects. Absolutely. This is why I think your personal decisions matter in this one. And I think we are treading dangerously towards authoritarianism. I think people should pay attention to that. But for the military, you sign up. Yeah, I mean, how much do you really even get paid when you're like, what is it, E1? Like when you're a private or whatever rank you get right when you enlist? They don't treat you like that well, So I'm like, what do you expect is going to happen when you're in the military? I mean, apparently I'm hearing that some people will get an administrative discharge if they don't get it. But my attitude is like, look, it's FDA approved. What about any other medication you get? I think even like Mike Cernovich was pointing this out. There are a lot of people who claim to be worried about their health, but they don't take care of their health. They eat garbage food. They don't exercise. There are people who are like, well, I don't know what's in it. It's on the CDC website. Don't trust them. Why would you trust the FDA or any other product when you're reading the ingredients list? They list everything. Look, I'm not a big fan of government in general. I lean more libertarian, but I certainly think there's Occam's razor. You can look on the CDC website. A lot of concerns are addressed on the website. My issue is the authoritarianism. And I think if a doctor recommends it, I think you should follow through with what your doctor recommends. I don't understand how there can be people who go to the doctor and are prescribed a whole bunch of things they don't even read about, but this is what they take issue with. You know what? Here's what I can say. I think what's obvious is that people don't trust the media. And the more we see like CNN doing an ad for vaccines, the more people are like, these people are not trustworthy, and thus I'm skeptical of this. I don't know to tell people because I understand the media lies all the time. But I can only just say this. By all means, disagree with me. By all means, comment if you do. You have the rights and the freedoms to choose what's right for you, which is what I think most of us agree on. But just think about this. Why would you trust one doctor over another when they're contradicting each other? This is a legitimate question. If you go to your doctor and they recommend something, that's all you need to do. But if you're prescribed a medication, you've probably never Google searched what it was. And I'm sure some of you have, because I do. I've been prescribed things in the past. I told the story before. I Googled it and said, hey, this has got a side effect I'm not a fan of. And they were like, we can switch it for something else. I'm like, cool. That's it. You just talk to your doctor, right? But there's a ton of medications where they're like, this is what it's called. And I'm like, I got no idea what that is. I trust you, doc, I guess. What am I supposed to do? If I get sick with something and they're like, here's an antibiotic, I'm going to be like, I don't know about that one. Or I can be like, I put my faith in you that you're going to try and do right by me. The problem I have is this opens the door to tons of really, really awful things. For one, in New York, they're mandating identification. Okay, papers, please, is not a good thing. We don't want that. But this is where we're headed. And even if we think it's great that there's an FDA-approved COVID vaccine, it's not great that it can lead down the path of requiring a whole bunch of medical treatments. And we should mention the slippery slope is not a fallacy. Sometimes it may be if it's exaggerated, but sometimes it's real. The New York Times says, the move is intended to harden the country's defenses against the highly contagious Delta variant, which has driven new cases and hospitalizations up across the country, especially in areas with low rates of vaccination, where many military bases are located. Biden announced last month that all federal employees and on-site contractors must be vaccinated against coronavirus or else submit to regular testing and other measures. The requirement applied to the 766,372 civilians working for the Defense Department, but not active duty service members. Mr. Austin has previously said that he would not be comfortable imposing a mandate before vaccines were fully approved by the FDA. Earlier this year, the New York Times reported that there was an undercurrent of resistance to the vaccine in the armed forces. Again, I don't quite understand why you would enlist or sign up and then take issue with only one vaccine. I got to be honest. You can explain it to me why people feel that way. I know trust in institutions at an all-time low, but maybe that's the real issue. Now we're going to see something interesting. As I've mentioned several times, Mr. Steve Bannon told me that come August 15th, we would see, pandemonium. We would see parents freaking out over what their schools were doing to their children. And he wasn't wrong. Now, it's not like the French Revolution or anything, but we did see parents protesting like crazy. What's going to happen now with these COVID vaccine mandates for all staff? Now, it's not the vaccine, my understanding, is not approved for people under 16. So they're still waiting for 12 to 15-year-old approval. There's a lot of questions about risk factors. But again, take it up with your doctor and talk to them about your kids and make sure you trust them. The issue now is what will happen when schools can't reopen. I'm sure a lot of teachers are going to have no problem with getting the vaccine. But what about the ones who physically can't? They're going to lose teachers. From Gothamist.com, they say, all New York City school staff will be required to take the COVID-19 vaccines according to a new mandate announced Monday by Mayor Bill de Blasio. The mayor is expected to share further details at his daily press conference at 10 a.m. The mandate arrived Monday morning just as the FDA approved Pfizer's vaccine. Unlike other city employees like hospital workers, Department of Education staff will not have an alternative to the vaccine, such as weekly testing. The policy will take effect September 27th and will require all Department of Education employees to upload proof of a first dose of the vaccination to an online portal. Nearly 1 million public school students will return to school on September 13th. Our school must be safe spaces for our students, Porter said Monday, calling the school staff vaccinations another layer of protection for our kids. Back in late July, the mayor called for all city employees to be vaccinated or undergo weekly COVID-19 testing. By mid-September, since then, city employee vaccinations have increased just 4 points, with 58% having at least one dose as early as last week. That means we can see 42% of teachers and other public sector employees being fired. Do you think people are just going to... This is America, man. People are defiant. And you know what? What they're not factoring into this is that there could be a very large portion of people who've been advised against it. They're not showing you that in these statistics. And I think people need to consider that. It's not just about underlying medical conditions. It's about faith-based ineligibility, and it's about risk factors. Somebody who may want to get pregnant and a doctor talks to them about potential risks. The CDC does recommend that even if you're pregnant, you can get the vaccine. But a doctor may say something specific about you and your pregnancy. Maybe there's a woman and she's got low iron. Okay, well, the CDC can recommend it generally, but a doctor might advise otherwise. It's why you got to talk to your doctors. That's why I'm not a fan of these celebrities coming out just telling you what to do, even if it is Donald Trump. Gothamist says, the city's announcement added that 63% of school staff have had at least one dose. Okay, so it's in this instance, it'll be 37% of teachers who probably get the boot. De Blasio said on Monday that he would immediately start working with labor unions to address the mandate. Michael Mulgrew, president of the United Federation of Teachers, which represents 84,000 teachers and paraprofessionals, said in a statement, "Our first priority is keeping our kids safe and the schools open. The city's teachers have led the way on this issue, with the great majority already vaccinated. While the city is asserting its legal authority to establish this mandate, there are many implementation details, including provisions for medical exceptions, which we need, that by law must be negotiated with the UFT and other unions, and if necessary, resolved by arbitration." My friends, there are no medical exemptions in New York. But check this out. Let's talk about the split from Newsweek. Dozens of Florida doctors exhausted by unvaccinated COVID patients beg people to get the shot. Newsweek reports dozens of South Florida doctors gathered early Monday to beg people to get a COVID-19 shot, citing their exhaustion and frustration with the flood of unvaccinated patients in their care. Quote, A large majority of hospitalized COVID patients are unvaccinated. This is not only upsetting, but it is also frustrating to all of us who are here today. Dr. Jennifer Buchiner said, a neurologist and stroke director at the Jupiter Medical Center said, many of these patients have decided not to get vaccinated, but when they're vaccinated, they tell us they wish they had. We are exhausted. Our patients and resources are running low, and we need your help. Dr. Rupesh Daria, an internal medicine specialist at Palm Beach Gardens, pleaded. 50 to 75 doctors from various hospitals in Palm Beach County gathered Monday morning before heading to their hospitals, intensive care units, emergency rooms, and operating rooms to urge Floridians to get vaccinated as the state sees a massive surge in hospitalizations. We are all here behind me together as your community doctors and hospitals with one simple message that can save your life. Please go get vaccinated and wear a mask. Now, these are doctors. I can absolutely respect that. They're not your doctor. So I hear these things and I say, okay, all right, let me talk to my doctor and figure out my risk factors. And maybe you should too. Well, then what about this? The inverse. From the New York Times, a hospital finds an unlikely group opposing vaccinations. It's workers. When a Staten Island hospital implemented a vaccine or testing mandate, some of its staff staged angry protests. The movement started discreetly, just a handful of people communicating on encrypted apps like WhatsApp and Signal. But in just days, it had ballooned tenfold, and within 2 weeks, it had turned into a full-blown public protest, with people waving picket signs to denounce efforts to push them to receive coronavirus vaccines. But these were not just any vaccine resistors. They were nurses, medical technicians, infection control officers, and other staff who work at a hospital in Staten Island, which is the highest rate of COVID-19 infection of any borough of New York City. Well, let me just tell you, when you use an iron fist, don't be surprised when people reject you. This is the big problem. Okay. CNN put out an ad, I guess. It was some kind of, talking about get your vaccine. And I'm like, who are they talking to? The people who watch CNN are fine with it. They're not convincing anyone. In fact, because they've been so partisan and untrustworthy, they're just making more people hesitant. Here's what you need to do. Separate yourselves from the culture war. That's what many of our guests on Timcast IRL have done. Okay, you want to think critically and reasonably. Why? It's tough. I am generally pro-vaccine, pro-standard medical science, trusting of my doctors, even fully recognizing that you shouldn't blindly trust anybody. But I don't know what to tell you. I really, really don't. And I think ultimately, so long as, I believe what I believe, many of you probably agree with me on this issue. It's just a personal issue. We got to get rid of the authoritarianism. That's the problem. You want to talk about getting more people vaccinated? Stop bashing people over the head with it. If anything, it's making things worse. It's making more people double down, like we're seeing with this story right here. Originally, it was just a few people saying, I don't know about this. Now it's a full-blown protest because they're saying, you can't make me do anything. I was at Vice, the media company. They said, hey, let's go to Venezuela. I said, okay. Security company said, you need these handful of vaccines. Vice says you have to get them. I said, okay. I went to a doctor. I understand. I do. That these are new. And so we just got FDA approval. So I fully respect people who are talking to their doctors and maybe they're saying, they want to wait a little bit or whatever. That's not my decision. That's yours. I genuinely am confused by a lot of this. I really am. I think mandating this is what's making the problem worse. I think if they didn't mandate it, tons of people would just be like, yeah, whatever, I'll get it. Because they mandate it, they've turned it into a political issue. And because of the political issue, you end up with the hesitant, which admittedly the largest education group among the hesitant are PhDs, whatever that means. And then you have the zealots, people of master's degrees and bachelors. I can't stand the zealotry, man. I really, really can't. So last week I went on Fox News talking about how New York has no medical exemptions and how that's shockingly authoritarian and insane. I had people on the left, these leftists saying, what's your point? And I'm like, we shouldn't tell people who have MS and epilepsy and history of anaphylaxis and cancer, they can't participate in society anymore. Like, that's messed up. But if a private business makes a choice, man, that's tough, isn't it? I don't think they should discriminate. So there's got to be faith-based and medical exemptions. And any good actual liberal would believe those things. But I don't know what liberal means anymore. It used to be that liberals were like, okay, we can't discriminate. So that means there's got to be faith and medical exemptions, right? Yeah, not anymore. New York has none of that. That's my problem here. Creating a fair society and equal opportunity. But when you have zealots like Bill de Blasio, and they feel like they can earn tribal points by just slamming an iron fist, it makes everything worse. You what is it saying? Flies and honey. You want to convince people to get the vaccine, then you need only be calm and reasonable with them and leave it up to them. You can guide a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? And therein lies the challenge. I look back at the smallpox and some of these other illnesses that we've eliminated with vaccines. It's not a one-for-one comparison. I see a lot of people on the left saying, look at these things we've eliminated. That's what CNN said. And I see people on the right saying those weren't respiratory ailments with animal reservoirs or whatever. And I'm like, yeah. Ultimately, I just think we're moving in a dangerous direction towards authoritarianism. It's hard for me on the vaccine stuff. You know what I mean? Because I got to tell you, I got to be completely honest. I'm a big fan. They're talking about with mRNA technology, HIV vaccines. I mean, this is when I first heard about mRNA stuff, I was like, this is really amazing. It's like really cool technology. It's been around since the 80s, I guess, but they've been, working on it and developing it. And so because of COVID, they're like, we're going to Operation Warp Speed. We're going to rush this one through. I'm not saying this is a negative. I'm saying a lot of people want to see like a 10 to 20 year study, but that's why I think it's your choice. Ultimately, I've got tremendously positive feelings about what the technology could lead us to. And unfortunately the authoritarianism is making me pessimistic about what's going to happen in the future because they're basically like ruining a great opportunity. There's a lot of people who don't like the mRNA stuff. I get it. I don't know, if you read, look, I'll put it this way. Dr. Chris Martenson, brilliant guy. We had him on Timcast IRL a couple times. And, he told me about alternative treatments. And I looked up studies, and there's conflicting studies. So it really comes down to, do you trust the government or not? Do you trust the medical institutions or not? Do you trust your doctor or not? And I'm like, I'm a bit of a trusting individual. I don't believe in conspiracy. I typically don't lean towards conspiracy theories. I certainly think things should be investigated, not blindly followed. The problem we have in the mainstream is you're either 100% for everything the government says, or the media and the government's always lying. I'll explain, right? Probably the easiest way to understand my view on this is I use the New York Times. I use the AP, as sources. I use CNN. I just don't trust them all the time and have to fact check them. But for the most part, you can see that, CNN's bad, let's be honest. But the New York Times is just somewhat bad. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I view the world. I lean towards a bit more trust. Tell me I'm wrong. That's fine. I don't know how else to live. I can't live in a world where I think everyone's out to get me or you can't trust anything. And I certainly can't live in a world where you're trusting, random blogs. So what do? Trust but verify. It's the easiest way to put it. I have a lot of friends who got the vaccine. I have a handful of stories about adverse reactions, bad ones. The good news is it seems like my friends seem to be doing better and seem to be recovering. But you don't hear the stories of people who are fine because they have nothing to tell you. They went and got the vaccine and they were fine. I think separate yourself from the culture war. There are zealots that want to just scream in your face and ban you. And there are zealots who want to tell you everyone's bad not to get you. And then there are reasonable skeptics who say, make a choice that makes sense for you, because we want to leave the choice up to the individual, and we want to keep personal responsibility as a factor here. I hate talking about this stuff, and I'm sure, I don't know how many people who watch care to listen, but I'll tell you this. Airplanes, trains, we can't stand for that, man. We just can't. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.